Worked in a funeral home, but discovers a terrible secret that changes everything. The sun had barely risen over the quiet town of Maplewood when Grandma Ruth stood in the dimly lit funeral home, the scent of fresh lilies filling the air. To most, this place was a somber reminder of loss. To Ruth, it was her second home. For over 4 decades, she had been the heartbeat of Maplewood Cemetery, comforting families in their darkest hours. Her warm smile offered solace, and her gentle touch soothed the pain of goodbye. But today, something felt different. Ruth shuffled through stacks of paperwork when an envelope fell from the stack. It was thick with an unmarked return address, the paper as heavy as her heart. She tore it open, her fingers trembling, and read the words that chilled her to the bone. Families had buried their loved ones, but some bodies might not be where they were meant to be. Disturbing whispers flickered through her mind like ghosts of the past. What if the very integrity of her work, a lifetime dedicated to honoring the dead, had been compromised? Her heart raced. The information in the letter was vague, but had a tone that urged her to look deeper. Who would dare to switch graves? Who would hide the truth? A rushed breeze swept through the room, rustling the papers and sending a shiver up her spine. Outside, the townsfolk strolled past, completely unaware of the looming darkness in their peaceful town. As she caught her breath, the memories flooded in. Whispered secrets in funeral gowns, hushed meetings. Under the chilling moonlight, the eerie feeling that some families were not sharing the whole truth. Suddenly, everything felt suspect. She recalled the strange looks from some locals when they spoke about the past. Had she been blind all these years? Ruth leaned against the cold marble slab of her workstation, the weight of guilt pressing down on her. Were the families she had comforted complicit in this deceit? Feeling clawed at her insides. Had they sensed her unease? Would they try to silence her? "Grandma?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. Her granddaughter Lily. The innocence in her voice tore at Ruth's heart. "Are you okay?" I need to know about the past," Ruth whispered, barely managing to hold in the tremor of fear. She couldn't involve Lily in this, not yet. But she had to dig deeper, for her family's legacy depended on it. As the evening sky dimmed, shadows danced eerily outside, and with them came whispers of danger. Could she unravel this web of deceit? Or would her quest lead her straight into the arms of a sinister truth? Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any exclusive content coming up. And since you're here, smash that like button because it really helps me with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. As the evening shadows stretched long across the funeral home, Ruth's heart pounded in her chest. "I need to know about the past," she had whispered into the phone, feeling the truth claw its way up her throat. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on her shoulders. She glanced toward the door with each creak, half expecting the mayor, or worse, something more sinister to come through. "Grandma, are you still there?" Lily's voice pulled her from the edge of her spiraling thoughts. "Yes, dear," she replied. "I'll call you back soon." With her pulse racing, Ruth set the phone down, her mind racing. She couldn't just sit here. She had to investigate, find the truth buried beneath layers of secrets. With shaky hands, she gathered her coat and stepped outside. The night air was fresh, tinged with the scent of damp earth. Moonlight spilled over Maplewood, bathing everything in a ghostly glow. Where to start? Maybe it was time she visited the cemetery itself. As she walked, she noticed townsfolk still milling about, chatting cheerily, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. Ruth could hardly focus. Her mind flitted between the letter, the families she had served, and the very ground they laid their loved ones to rest upon. When she arrived, the cemetery loomed before her, not as a place of peace, but as a labyrinth of potential betrayal. Ruth's heart thudded louder as she approached the oldest section, the stones weathered and worn. Each grave told a story, but one in particular caught her eye, a headstone with a name she recognized from the letter. Jennifer Collins. Kneeling, Ruth brushed her fingers over the engraving, bile rising in her throat. "What are you hiding?" she murmured. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. Startled, she looked up to find Harold, the town historian, watching her. His face was pale, eyes wide. "Ruth, you shouldn't be here." "Not now," he urged, glancing around as if someone might overhear. "What do you mean?" she shot back, her heart racing. "There are things you don't know, things tied to this grave." His voice dropped to a whisper, urgency creeping in. Jennifer was not who people think she was. "What are you saying, Harold?" Before he could reply, a loud rumble of thunder tore through the sky, and all of a sudden, the ground beneath them trembled. A haunting crack echoed as the earth shifted. Staggered back, gasping in shock as she recognized the face inside. It was someone she thought she had buried decades ago, a face etched in memory and whispered about in hushed conversations. "Mom?" Ruth's voice trembled, disbelief washing over her. The chilling truth hit Ruth harder than she ever expected. "How? Why?" Her whole world spun, tangled in confusion as memories collided with an undeniable, devastating reality. "Ruth, there's no time," Harold urged, his eyes frantic. "We have to leave. They will come for you." "Will they? Who are they?" Every scream of the wind and distant thunder only heightened her anxiety. With the weight of newfound horrors crashing down, Ruth stood rooted to the spot. Could she trust Harold? Was this a trap? The night was filled with uncertainty, monstrous shadows stretching across the graveyard. The urgency pressed down like a vice. "I'll find the truth," she murmured, determination flickering in her heart. But at what cost? As thunder rumbled once more, the ground beneath her continued to shift, a promise of more revelations yet hidden in the dark. Ruth's mind spun as she stared at the open casket. The face staring back at her was her mother's, a figure she believed had been resting in a grave far away. "Mom?" A word slipped from her lips like a desperate prayer. Confusion intermingled with fear, swirling around her insides like a storm. "Ruth, we need to go!" Harold's voice broke into her panic, but her gaze was glued to the casket. She couldn't wrap her mind around how this was possible. Memories crashed over her, a childhood filled with love, laughter, and a mother she thought she'd lost forever. Had it all been a lie? Suddenly, the air grew thick with tension, and all at once the ground beneath them trembled violently. Thunder roared overhead, almost in sync with Ruth's racing heart. Harold's eyes widened in fear, and without hesitation, he reached for her, yanking her back. But something else happened. A low, rumbling sound echoed around them. Deep, guttural, like something monstrous waking from a long sleep. "Look out!" Harold shouted, but it was too late. A massive chunk of earth exploded upward beside them, spraying dirt and rocks in every direction. Ruth fell backward, landing painfully on the ground. A scream escaped her lips, a raw burst of terror. She struggled to her feet, wiping the dirt from her eyes. But what she saw next froze her blood. From the gaping hole, emerging like a nightmare from the depths, a figure clawed its way out, a figure that looked hauntingly familiar. It was Jennifer Collins, the name etched in the gravestone. But this wasn't the peacefully resting face from Ruth's memories. No, this was a grotesque mask of rage and anguish, her eyes wild and dark, the remnants of a death unaccepted, twisted into something unnatural. "Did you think you could bury me?" Jennifer screamed, her voice sending chills down Ruth's spine. The scene spiraled into chaos as townsfolk, drawn by the tumult, began to gather at the cemetery's edge, faces pale with shock and disbelief. "Help me!" Jennifer's voice rose above the panic, almost pleading. But as her eyes locked onto Ruth, something shifted. Recognition flickered, forcing Ruth to take a step back. A dark realization dawned. "You knew, didn't you? You knew all along!" Ruth felt her chest tighten as the accusation wove its way through the air, heavier than the gathering storm clouds. "I couldn't!" Harold shouted. But even he appeared unsettled, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. "It was supposed to stay buried." "Stay buried?" Ruth echoed, falling to her knees, torn between disbelief and the urge to shake Harold for answers. Why would you say that? But before he could respond, a new voice broke through the thickening tension, cool and composed. "Ruth, is everything all right?" It was the mayor, stepping closer with a concerned look. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, maybe even guilt. In that moment, everything shifted. The familiar faces that had always surrounded Ruth suddenly felt like masks hiding untold truths. Who had been in on this? Why had her own family turned a blind eye? Behind her, Jennifer's figure was rising, anger and sorrow mingling into something fierce. "You will not silence me again, Ruth. I will reveal the truth." "No!" Ruth screamed. But the words felt weak against the overwhelming revelations crashing around her. The rumble of thunder rolled through the night, drowning her voice, merging with the chaos. Who were these people? Why did they keep returning from the grave? Her heart raced as the pieces fell into place, forming a terrifying puzzle she never asked to complete. As the crowd lurched forward, a series of gasps echoed. Ruth's heart sank further when she caught sight of the mayor stepping back, his eyes wide and fearful. "Perhaps it's time we all came clean," he said slowly, glancing between Harold and Ruth. But his tone lacked sincerity. In the center of it all, fear gripped her chest. Would she truly unravel the web of betrayal tied to her family, to this town? Shadows danced menacingly around her, and Ruth felt the cold bite of dread. What was the truth? What had been buried? And how deep did it go? With dusk creeping in and tension hanging like thick fog, Ruth stood at the edge of oblivion, staring down into a pit of secrets that threatened to consume everything she once thought she knew. Ruth stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, as Jennifer emerged from the grave, a living nightmare. Her heart raced like a wild animal, tearing through the thick fog of disbelief. But before she could fully process what was happening, the mayor's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone, please, step back!" he shouted to the onlookers who had gathered, fear rippling through the crowd. They muttered among themselves, eyes wide as they took in the impossible scene. "Are you all seeing this?" someone gasped, clutching their partner's arm. That's not possible!" Ruth flicked her gaze from Jennifer to Harold, who stood pale and trembling. "You knew," she whispered, accused hurt bubbling hot in her chest, the betrayal carved deeper than any wound. "You all knew!" But then a sudden shift. The ground trembled beneath her again, and the tension thickened like storm clouds. Another explosion of dirt sent a shock wave through the air. "Run!" Harold yelled, and the crowd surged backward, panic rising like a tide. But then, among the scattered dust and commotion, something unexpected happened. The earth split open wider, revealing not just one casket, but several, their lids snapping open as if they had been held shut by unseen hands. Ruth's heart slammed against her ribcage. Bodies emerged, pale and ghostly, blinking against the sudden light. They stumbled forth, dazed, nightmares personified. Yet more shocking than she could have ever imagined. One of the figures wore a familiar face. "Sam," Ruth choked out, seeing her old friend from high school standing before her, lost and confused. He had died years ago in a car accident, a tragedy that tore through their tight-knit community. "Ruth?" His voice cracked like glass under pressure. "What is happening?" A wave of horror washed over her. "Sam! How? Why?" The mayor's expression shifted, panic morphing into something else, something darker. "They should have never come back." He stepped forward, hands trembling, fingers twitching like he was caught in an electric storm. "It was supposed to be safe. No one was meant to know." "How could you?" Harold shouted, voice breaking. "They were supposed to be at peace." Ruth struggled to breathe, confusion swirling with grief and anger. Why were her friends coming back? What sick plan had the mayor concocted? The weight of shock wrapped around her like a fog, smothering her thoughts. "Ruth, listen!" Sam's voice broke through her disarray. But the words slipped away, drowned in the chaos as Jennifer, wild-eyed, lunged forward. "It's not just us!" she shrieked, face contorting in rage. And pain. "They're coming for you, too!" "No, I don't understand," Ruth shouted, but the words felt weak against the overwhelming tide of truth crashing over her. And just like that, the crowd began to panic. People pushed and shoved, desperate to escape the hell unfurling before them. Ruth saw Lily in the distance, eyes wide with confusion and fear. A surge of protectiveness shot through her chest. "Lily!" Ruth cried, but the girl was swallowed by the frenetic movement of bodies. The earth quaked again, but this time it wasn't just the surface trembling. A shadow loomed over them, massive and dark, emerging from the depths. A thing that resembled a man, but was twisted and horrifying. Ruth's breath hitched as it revealed itself. A figure with familiar features shrouded in darkness. Their families lost. Patriarch, her father, the one everyone claimed died trying to protect her secrets. "Ruth," he said, voice a low growl, laced with the echoes of betrayal. "You thought you could run from us?" A chill settled in the pit of her stomach. The truth came crashing down like shattered glass. Her family, her past, it was all entwined in a web of deception she had only begun to untangle. "Get away from her!" Harold yelled, stepping defensively in front of Ruth. But his voice trembled. The reality hit hard. The bonds they once held now felt fragile, torn at the seams by horrifying truths. Questions swirled inside Ruth's mind. Who was she now, standing amidst the chaos? And in this dark unfolding, who could she trust? The shadows danced closer, and the ragged breaths of her past echoed in her ears. As the figures continued to emerge, Ruth knew she was posed at the brink of something monumental, something that could either destroy her or set her free. As the crowd fell into chaos and her father's haunted eyes bore into her, a single thought ignited. What had she truly uncovered? And would she ever escape the darkness that was rising around her? Ruth stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, as Jennifer emerged from the grave. A living nightmare. Desperation coiled tightly in her chest. Panic surged through the crowd like a wild wind, sending whispers of dread spiraling around her. But before she could fully grasp the chaos unfolding, the mayor's voice boomed through the frenzy. "Everyone, please, step back." He stepped closer, urgency oozing from his words. As the townsfolk, who just moments ago had been merely horrified spectators, now teetered in a collective state of shock. "Is this even real?" someone in the back mumbled, clutching their partner's arm. "How could they be alive?" With each breath, Ruth's heart raced like a scared rabbit, the reality of the impossible tightening around her. She flicked her gaze from Jennifer, filled with fury and sorrow, to Harold, whose face mirrored her own confusion and horror. "You knew," she whispered, the betrayal aching deep inside. Suddenly, without warning, the earth trembled violently again. The ground beneath ruptured, and another shadow surged upward, thick and gnarled. Ruth stumbled back, her legs quaking, as the earth itself seemed to rebel against all they knew. "Run!" Harold shouted, but chaos erupted too quickly. The remaining townsfolk screamed. There. Desperate movements a blur as they fled. Yet there was no time to escape as another chilling figure emerged. A man who bore a striking resemblance to her grandfather, who had been declared dead years back. "Ruth," he rasped, eyes dark and wild. "We can't hide any longer." Shock slid down Ruth's spine like ice water. The atmosphere twisted, tightening around her, as memories she thought were safe began to unravel. What? It can't be. They all died because of the truth, her grandfather exclaimed, voice cracking under the strain. But there was something in his gaze, familiar yet threatening. "You must understand, it was never about us." "Us?" Ruth echoed, confusion swelling in her chest. "What do you mean?" But before he could explain, another figure emerged, irregular and monstrous, a grotesque mix of memories and nightmares. It was her father, his face twisted in anger, his eyes piercing through the chaos. "You thought you could escape our fate?" he bellowed, his voice echoing against the night. The reality crashed down hard. All those she thought lost, those buried in the town's history, were rising from their graves, angry, seeking vengeance. The truths buried deeper than the earth itself clawed out, threatening to expose a past Ruth had tried desperately to reclaim. Why? Ruth finally shouted into the tempest, desperation spilling from her heart. "Why would you come back, just to torment me? Why now?" And then, just as her heart threatened to shatter, an earth-shattering roar erupted from behind her. A colossal shadow loomed over the cemetery, dark claws reaching out, ready to grasp at anything in its path. The crowd gasped as the shape transformed, revealing more skeletons jutting forth. A wave of bodies flooding from the abyss, as if the ground itself was spilling its secrets in a gruesome display. Ruth fell to her knees, breath hitching in her throat. "No! What is this?" She watched, horrified, as familiar faces passed through, twisted and tainted by betrayal. Then, before she knew it, she was staring into Lily's eyes, wide with fear, as she appeared from behind the mass of chaos. "Grandma, what's happening?" Her voice cut through the madness, filled with innocence and terror. "Stay back!" Ruth screamed, grasping for her granddaughter, trying to shield her from the horror unfolding. Then it hit her, all the lies, the hidden truths. What if her family wasn't simply part of this evil? What if they were the architects of it all? And in that moment, a sickening realization struck her like lightning. The families they had buried, the ones who returned now, they were not victims. They were pawns in a game much larger than she could comprehend. Something dark that had always been lurking beneath the surface of Maplewood. "Lily!" she cried, urgency clawing at her. But before she could pull her granddaughter to safety, a rumble filled the air. The ground shook furiously as a dark fissure opened wide beneath their feet, swallowing everything in its path. "No!" Ruth screamed, reaching out, but it was too late. The ground split them apart, and as she fell to her knees, darkness enveloped her world. Ruth's reality caved under the pressure of secrets clawing their way to light. Was her family part of the darkness? Had they conspired all along to sustain the cycle of death in Maplewood? The last thing she heard, before silence fell like a crushing weight, was the echo of Jennifer's voice, an eerie laughter that sent chills down her spine. "Welcome back to the truth, Ruth." As the darkness consumed her, Ruth's heart pounded with one haunting question. What would become of the living now that the dead had risen? Ruth's world imploded, darkness swallowing her. Every ounce of fear gripped her heart like a vice. But just as she felt her consciousness slipping away, a blinding light pierced through the shadows, a raw, shimmering beam igniting the space around her. "Mom?" An unexpected voice broke through the chaos, laced with urgency. It was a voice she thought she'd never hear again. A lifeline in the storm. Ruth blinked, and reality unfurled around her. Suddenly she was back in her childhood home. The walls were alive with sunlight, and her mother stood there, vibrant and real, like a spirit summoned from memory. "Ruth, you have to listen." Her mother's eyes glimmered with fierce determination. "Mom, but how?" Ruth stammered, confusion twisting her thoughts. She felt weightless, like she could float away, unsure of what was real. "We never left you," her mother said, stepping closer, the warmth radiating off her. "Your family, we created a barrier to protect you from the darkness." "Protect me?" Ruth stepped back, the implications crashing down like waves. All of this? This isn't protection. You've haunted me. You all have. You let me believe I was alone. While her mother held up a calming hand, yet her expression grew grave. "The town, they're tied to this. They needed to keep the truth hidden, to keep you safe." Ruth glanced back towards the cemetery, where bodies rose in chaos. Old friends, old enemies, the merging from the darkness, each screaming memories she wished didn't exist. The familiars faced morphing realities, their faces twisted by despair. Would they all come back to life just to drag her into this abyss? But her mother pressed on, voice steady. "They want you, Ruth. The ones buried, the ones rising, they crave your spirit." "What?" Chaos swirled in her mind like a whirlwind. "Why would they want me?" "Because they need someone like you to complete the cycle," her mother replied, urgency filling the air. "To give them power. They want revenge on those who buried them, on those who buried the truth." Suddenly, an eerie hush fell over the room. Ruth felt the transition in the air, heavy and thick, like a storm front. The shadows around her flickered, and she turned to see the mayor standing at the door, his face a mask of horror. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice a desperate plea. But it was too late. The shadow figures outside surged, moving towards them with a terrifying determination. They were no longer simply reanimated corpses. They were an army, a dark force with one goal in mind. "Ruth. Please, Ruth." The mayor's eyes darted around, desperation spilling from his posture. "We thought it was just a legend. It was never meant to happen like this." "What are you saying?" Ruth felt time. "Please." Dread crawling up her spine. As the mayor struggled, she grasped for clarity, but the world flickered like an old film reel, images flashing in and out of focus. "They've come for the bloodline," he gagged out, trembling under the weight of their revelations. "You're the last of us, Ruth. You opened the door to everything." In that moment, the ground shook beneath them again, a blinding light bursting forth from the cracks. Shapes twisted and enveloped her mother, roots of dark energy extending out like grasping fingers. "No, Mom!" Ruth screamed, terror clawing at her throat. Before she knew it, the world flicked upside down. And then it hit her. Her mother wasn't just an innocent caught in this chaotic web. The woman who had protected her through shadows had also ensured their darkness remained concealed. "Why?" Ruth's voice trembled, disbelief flooding her. "You betrayed me?" As everything around her fell silent, she understood. They had all played her. All of them. The mayor, Harold, even the dead who returned. They had one mission, to bind her to their legacy. And Ruth was standing at the brink of something far more sinister than she could have imagined. As the shadows closed in, she took a deep breath. "I won't let it happen!" But as the light drenched the scene in a brilliant glow, everything shattered. One final scream echoed in her mind as dark tendrils of power lashed out. Ruth braced herself, heart thunderous, as they reached for her, and she felt the pull of the past, a pull demanding she step forward. All at once, she stood before the abyss, staring into her own fate. A single question echoed in her mind. Who truly held the power here? Her, or the darkness bent on swallowing them all? Ruth stood at the edge of the abyss, the darkness pulling at her like a tide, threatening to swallow her whole. She could feel the weight of expectation bearing down on her from the figures around her, every grim face staring, every half-formed whisper begging for attention. Her heart raced as the shadows edged closer, but just as panic clutched at her throat, her mother spoke with fierce clarity. "You have to wake up, Ruth. You must reclaim your strength." "Strength?" Ruth echoed, her disbelief overshadowing any glimmer of hope. "You've all been living in shadows. How can I trust you? You have the power they want," her mother insisted, urgency spilling from her. "Do you remember the stories? The ones that spoke of you? That you were destined to break the cycle. The dark ties of this town started with you, and they need you to maintain the balance." Ruth shook her head, the weight of confusion heavy on her. "Balance? What balance? You're telling me my return is intertwined with this horror?" But there was no time for answers. The earth shook again, more violently this time, roots of darkness stretching towards her, intent on snatching her away from reality. The mayor's fearful gasp pierced the air as he stumbled into the room, face pale, eyes wide with dread. "Ruth, you—" He was cut off as the very foundation began to crumble around them. Suddenly, a blinding brightness filled the space, converging on Ruth. She squeezed her eyes shut, warmth enveloping her, a strange comfort against the chaos. "Ruth, listen to me!" Sam, the face of her past, called out from the approaching shadow, piercing through the chaos. "You were chosen to stop this!" And just then, with the ground shaking violently beneath them, something spectacular happened. The light burst forth, breaking into countless threads like cascading diamonds, illuminating every corner of the room. All at once, the shadows that had once threatened to consume her began to retreat. They recoiled, shrieking as if they were burning under the light's intensity. But as the figures flickered in and out of focus, Ruth noticed something chilling. The familiar shapes twisted, reforming. Her father, the menacing figure from moments earlier, blurred into another form. The air thickened with dread as Ruth squinted against the brightness. In a heartbeat, her father morphed into someone else entirely. An unexpected realization knocking the air from her lungs. It was Harold, standing where her father had just been, confusion dancing in his eyes, but backed by a sinister grin. "Did you really think you could free everyone?" he taunted, voice darkening as the light flicked around him. "You were chosen, yes, but for darker purposes than you realize." Ruth's heart stumbled. "What do you mean?" A lump rose in her throat, churning with disbelief. "What have you done?" And then the truth hit her. The devastation expanded like a balloon bursting in fire. Harold was no innocent. He was the very puppet master of this dark play. The shadows she'd seen were not mere embodiments of past regrets. They were manifestations of his control, conjured from the pain of buried lives he commanded. With a sudden movement, he advanced, a predator closing in on its prey. "You were meant to serve our family's legacy, Ruth. The truth I buried was meant to empower you. I thought I could control it, but now you threaten everything." Panic washed over Ruth. She staggered backward, blood pounding in her ears. "You son of a—" But before she could finish, the figures behind Harold surged, pulling closer, a collective of lost souls chanting in a language that rattled her bones. Breath. The shadows knew something she didn't. "What did you do, Harold?" she gasped, grasping for understanding. "It's too late, my dearest. You will become the key to a darkness that will allow our legacy to thrive. It always has been." Ruth stared into Harold's eyes, now a swirl of chaos and fury. The figures behind him began to merge, rising in a grotesque display of faces she knew too well. Families of the town, business owners, friends. Each had an inkling of betrayal in their gazes. "Everything you thought you knew was a lie," Harold sneered, a chill wrapping around each word. Dread filled her whole being as the shadows edged nearer. The ground quaked beneath her. Here at the edge of revelation, she stood, teetering into a void now reshaped by twisted familial ties. "Why?" she shouted, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "Why would you do this?" "It's what we are," he whispered, voice dripping with malice as the darkness closed around her. "Embrace it, or be consumed." Suddenly, the shadowy figures lunged forward, their voices merging into one screaming chorus echoing throughout the depths of the night. And Ruth could only wonder what had been lost and what was still to come. With the ground beneath her collapsing and shadows rising, one question burned in her mind. Could she fight her own blood, or was it too late to escape this dark truth? Ruth stood at the edge of the abyss, shadows creeping closer, their forms twisting into menacing shapes. Her heart raced. Panic clawed at her, amplified by the revelation that Harold was the mastermind, not a simple pawn. Did the entire town know? But in that instant, with darkness ready to swallow her whole, something extraordinary happened. A sudden tremor ran through her body. A flash of bright light erupted from the fissure in the ground. It filled the night sky, illuminating faces of the dead and the living. An energy surged, crackling violently, and a figure stepped forth from the glow. A woman dressed in white, hair like golden silk cascading down her shoulders. "Catherine!" Ruth gasped, recognition slicing through her confusion like a knife. Her sister. A sister who had been lost to tragedy as a child, buried deep in family lore. Nobody talked about Catherine. Her disappearance was a dark blemish the family tried to erase. "Ruth, I've returned to finish what I started," Catherine declared. Voice steady, but resonating with urgency. "You are part of something greater than you know." Ruth's heart raced as Catherine advanced, but confusion engulfed her. "What do you mean? Are you alive?" "No, I was never truly gone. I took the path that led to the truth." She turned her gaze to the shadows swirling around them, fury simmering in her eyes. "They've manipulated you all, and it's time for the real stories to come to light." Harold sneered. But there was uncertainty in his expression. "You were just a kid. What do you know about this?" Catherine's gaze bore into him. "I know everything. The pact made to keep the dark forces at bay depended on my silence, a sacrifice. The rituals, the graves, the blood, they were meant to contain what was buried deep beneath this town." No one moved. The air felt electric. Ruth's heart drummed in her chest. This wasn't just a family secret. It was an entire legacy of manipulation. "Ruth, they want you as a channel," Catherine continued, stepping closer to her sister. "But you can break the cycle." Ruth struggled to absorb it all. "Break the cycle? How can I even begin?" "You must stand against the darkness." Catherine reached out, her hand trembling with power. But you won't survive unless you accept who you are. You carry the potential to either destroy everything or save what's left. The shadows hesitated, as if aware of the shift in energy. Bodies began to tremble, expressions of shock and fury etching deeper into their faces. Ruth felt a mysterious strength swell from within, fighting against the despair that threatened to consume her. "Together, Ruth," Catherine urged, "we can rise against the legacy they want you to uphold. We were never meant to be puppets." But just as Ruth stepped forward, emboldened, a piercing scream erupted from the crowd. "Lily!" Her granddaughter stumbled, eyes wide with horror, as something surged forward from behind her. The mayor, trembling, was pulled into the shadows, fear frozen on his face. And then there was a shift. The ground erupted once more, dark tendrils shooting out like venomous snakes, pulling at the living and the dead alike. The cemetery rumbled under the weight of a haunting truth that was ready to... As he spoke, the earth split open wider, revealing something astonishing, a colossal chest, ancient and adorned with strange symbols rising from the depths. This wasn't just ground. It was a crypt that held millions of buried secrets. "What is this?" Ruth whispered, panic climbing as her breaths grew shallow. But truth, bittersweet, clawed at her soul. All eyes turned to the snaking shadows that weaved amongst the tombstones. And there, shimmering in the surreal glow, was a reflection of her own face staring back at her from the chest. "Ruth," her sister whispered, urgency draping her words. "What you see is a reflection of your power. You can reclaim what is rightfully yours. Choose wisely." But in that moment, heartbreak crashed into resolve. A sudden realization struck, a revelation that shattered everything she thought she understood. The bases twisting around her were not merely echoes of the past. They were fragments of her very being, echoes she unwittingly carried. "What if," Ruth's voice trembled, "what if I am the darkness?" And at that instant, a deafening roar erupted from the shadows, fueling her fear. A warning that something bigger was coming. A storm brewed on the horizon. Suddenly, the atmosphere thickened, shadows twisting into a singular, monstrous form, a horrifying revelation of every choice made and a weight of 1,000 sins. Family curse, but a family truth she never wanted to confront. Ruth stood at the edge of the abyss, shadows creeping closer, their forms twisting into menacing shapes. Her heart raced, panic clawed at her, amplified by the revelation that Harold was the mastermind, not a simple pawn. Did the entire town know? But in that instant, with darkness ready to swallow her whole, something extraordinary happened. A sudden tremor ran through her body. A flash of bright light erupted from the fissure in the ground. It filled the night sky, illuminating faces of the dead and the living. An energy surged, crackling violently, and a figure stepped forth from the glow. A woman dressed in white, hair like golden silk cascading down her shoulders. "Catherine!" Ruth gasped, recognition slicing through her confusion like a knife. Her sister, a sister who had been lost to tragedy as a child, buried deep in family lore. Nobody talked about Catherine. Her disappearance was a dark blemish the family tried to erase. "Ruth, to finish what I started," Catherine declared, voice steady but resonating with urgency. You are part of something greater than you know. Ruth's heart raced as Catherine advanced, but confusion engulfed her. What do you mean? Are you alive? No, I was never truly gone. I took the path that led to the truth. She turned her gaze to the shadows, swirling around them, fury simmering in her eyes. They've manipulated you all, and it's time for the real stories to come to light. Harold sneered, but there was uncertainty in his expression. You were just a kid. What? Do you know about this? Catherine's gaze bore into him. I know everything. The pact made to keep the dark forces at bay depended on my silence. A sacrifice. The rituals, the graves, the blood. They were meant to contain what was buried deep beneath this town. No one moved. The air felt electric. Ruth's heart drummed in her chest. This wasn't just a family secret. It was an entire legacy of manipulation. Ruth, they want you as a channel, Catherine continued, stepping closer to her sister. But you can break the cycle. Ruth struggled to absorb it all. Break the cycle? How can I even begin? You must stand against the darkness. Catherine reached out, her hand trembling with power. But you won't survive unless you accept who you are. You carry the potential to either destroy everything or save what's left. The shadows hesitated, as if aware of the shift in energy. Bodies began to tremble, expressions of shock and fury etching deeper into their faces. Ruth felt a mysterious strength swell from within, fighting against the despair that threatened to consume her. Together, Ruth, Catherine urged. We can rise against the legacy they want you to uphold. We were never meant to be puppets. But just as Ruth stepped forward, emboldened, a piercing scream erupted from the crowd. Lily! Her granddaughter stumbled, eyes wide with horror, as something surged forward from behind her. The mayor, trembling, was pulled into the shadows, fear frozen on his face. And then there was a shift. The ground erupted once more, dark tendrils shooting out like venomous snakes, pulling at the living and the dead alike. The cemetery rumbled under the weight of a haunting truth that was ready to. But before Ruth could react, Harold lunged toward Catherine, eyes wild. Don't you dare! You're the last obstacle. If she embraces this. And just as he spoke, the earth split open wider, revealing something astonishing. A colossal chest, ancient and adorned with strange symbols, rising from the depths. This wasn't just ground. It was a crypt that held millions of buried secrets. What is this? Ruth whispered, panic climbing as her breaths grew shallow, urgency draping her words. What you see is a reflection of your power. You can reclaim what is rightfully yours. Choose wisely. But in that moment, heartbreak crashed into resolve. A sudden realization struck, a revelation that shattered everything she thought she understood. The faces twisting around her were not merely echoes of the past. They were fragments of her very being, echoes she unwittingly carried. What if? Ruth's voice trembled. What if I am the darkness? Ruth, no! Catherine shouted, panic in her eyes, but the moment lingered too long. The shadows that had surged forward froze, and something surged wildly within the chest, swirling like a tempest. Ruth felt herself drawn closer, helpless against the pull of the light, her body caught in a vice of temptation and fear. The shadows around them wailed. In despair, pulling back slightly, aware of the storm brewing within the chest. I've seen what you saw, the darkness that lives in our blood, Catherine cried, desperately trying to reach her sister. You're more than they know. With that, the chest erupted, unleashing a blinding wave of energy that shot through Ruth. The world around her warped, twisted, and in a heartbeat, the faces of the town flashed. Transformed. Ruth staggered back as the realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. It wasn't just her family tied to the darkness. The truth twisted like a serpent, hiding among secrets shared by all. The shadows around her morphed, revealing familiar faces, friends, family, long-gone lovers, each one tied to her, each one connected through blood and betrayal. No! She gasped, her heart racing. This can't be. How is this possible? But as the tide of memory swelled, a different energy emerged from the chest. A flicker that caught Ruth's attention. It wasn't a shadow. It was a bright figure, standing defiantly against the darkness. Ruth! Lily called again, voice cut through the weight of despair. No! You can't listen to them! You're not like them! In that moment, everything shifted. The shadows fell away, revealing a new truth, an unexpected bond hidden deep within her. The very essence of their family had been built on sacrifice, fear, power, and now, ultimately, love. And in that moment, something within Ruth stirred. A flicker of hope ignited as cracks spread through the dark energy, light radiating outward. She realized she could break the cycle. Catherine! Ruth cried, bringing her sister into focus. We can change everything. We have to unite against this. All eyes turned to Ruth, a swell of hope and dread intertwined, waiting for her to decide. Would she confront this legacy of darkness, or let it consume her? The choices hung suspended in the air, each one powerful enough to transform everything. And then it happened. The shadows recoiled, and Ruth's reflection in the chest began to shimmer, not with darkness, but with a fierce, blazing light. Ruth, whatever you do, just know the truth will never die, Catherine warned, stepping forward. But it's yours to command. The heart of the crypt pulsed, and Ruth felt the undeniable call of power coursing through her veins, calling her name, demanding her dedication. Will you embrace the truth? A voice creaked from the shadows. Or will you? Let it consume you. With that, everything teetered at the edge of oblivion, and Ruth had to decide, who would she become in the face of this darkness? Would she forge a new path, or join the lineage of shadows? The choice lay before her, fraught with uncertainty, as the abyss beckoned. Ruth's heart raced as the shadows stretched toward her, their twisted forms gnawing at the edges of her resolve. She could feel the energy from the chest pulsing against her skin, a force of warmth combating the cold despair swirling around her. Catherine's presence steadied her. The sister paused, caught between the power of Ruth's light and the darkness of their demands. Ruth closed her eyes, taking a breath as she thought of Lily, her granddaughter's innocence amidst the storm of grief and horror. I will not be a pawn in someone else's game, she declared, each word igniting deeper faith within her. In that moment, everything shifted. The chest unleashed a radiant beam that interwove with Ruth's spirit, a strange tether binding them together. The terrifying whispers of the shadows softened, losing their grip like water slipping through her fingers. It's time to reveal our stories, the ones buried beneath all this darkness, Ruth shouted. looking directly into the storm of lost souls clawing for attention. "You will not control my family or my town any longer." As she stepped forward, the brilliant light drew the shadows back, their twisted forms battling the incoming tide of recognition. Faces of anguish morphed into expressions of understanding. Each figure in the graveyard, each tragic story sewn into the soil of Maplewood, was tied to Ruth's legacy. Yet their pain had not diminished her strength. Instead, it fueled it. "Catherine," Ruth called, their eyes locking. "Together, let's break the cycle." With renewed vigor, she grasped her sister's hand. The brightness surged, and in that moment of solidarity, they unlocked the tether of betrayal that had cursed their lineage. Shadows turned to vapor, intangible sighs of their once agonizing truths dissipating into the night air. "Make way! This ends now!" Harold screamed, desperation rising in his voice. But he was powerless against the united force of the sisters. Ruth felt the shadow's fury rise like a tempest, but her heart pounded with an otherworldly confidence. "You've taken enough from us," she shouted as the light enveloped them. "This town belongs to the living." Like a butterfly breaking free from its cocoon, Ruth emerged, her feet firm on the ground. She felt the pangs of ancestral heritage vibrating in her blood. The shadows crashed against the light one last time before being consumed, melting into the earth as whispers of resentment transformed into echoes of understanding. Ruth turned back toward the villagers, who stood motionless, confusion mingling with awe. "This isn't just our past. It belongs to all of you," she implored, fierce sincerity in her voice. "Forgive. Remember. We can rise together," she exclaimed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Light danced in the moonlit sky, bathing the cemetery in a gentle glow. Lily emerged through the throng, her wide eyes sparkling. "Grandma!" She ran into Ruth's open arms, and in that embrace, the cycle of pain finally began to heal. The town united in silence, absorbing the once dreaded energy that inflicted fear. Each whispered story, now embraced, folded into a beautiful narrative of forgiveness and renewal. "Thank you, Ruth," Catherine whispered, stepping back. "You freed us. Our legacy no longer binds. It liberates." As the glow began to fade, Ruth felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The past transformed, but didn't disappear. It wove in itself into a tapestry, alive with hope, love, and understanding. And standing amidst her family, both living and reborn, she found a sense of belonging, a touchstone of unity that transcended the shadows. In memory of those lost and in love for those who remain, Ruth murmured, her heart swelling, "Let's make Maplewood a place of stories that bring life, not death." As the first rays of dawn illuminated the cemetery, Ruth and her family knew this was not an end, but a beginning, a chance to shape the future together. You have to subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss any of the next exclusive stories. Smash that like button right now to feed the algorithm and flood the comments section with your thoughts and theories about this ending. Don't wait even one more second to share this with at least 5 friends who need to see how this ends. You are part of this incredible journey, and your support matters.